Got to start for a minute or two, but I hope you're all doing well. It's the beginning of week 5, isn't it?
Is
I
it?
think it's week 4.
It's the beginning of week 4.
Oh, thank God.
Wow, I wrong? No, I think it's the beginning of week 5. When did we start? We had our half week on the 20th. So didn't we start on the 20th?
Yeah, somewhere around in at the end of September. So I think it is week 5. I was freaking out a bit, but yeah, I think it's week 5 right now.
Don't freak out
Well,
because
it's midterms. That's why.
I know, and the rest of the term flies too. But you can also say to yourself, "I got 6 weeks left, and that's it."
Yeah, that too. Quick question, Eric. Do we have anything for the midterm upcoming, or just papers and then the final?
No midterm, just the papers in the final and participation. That's all you got.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You guys have been participating pretty well. And remember, you can augment that participation grade in the well, you're supposed to be doing the discussion board too, the forum. Tatum really wants to peel that. Is that a mandarin orange? She wants to peel that, but she also wants to react to what I'm saying because the camera's on. I get it. Well, as I reread this play, because this has been one of my favorite plays that I've never directed or acted in or seen. I can't think of any play that I haven't, that I've only read that I like as much as this one. And as I reread it this time, all of a sudden I realized that it's even more relevant today than it was when I first read it in 1990, I think, maybe 92. Of course, it was written in 56, so it's a little bit later than the others. What'd you guys think of this play? You don't have to like it. Oh, go ahead, Aiden.
Yeah, I was gonna say that weirdly I thought it was probably the least ambiguous of the ones we've read so far. It was a lot easier to follow. I got what the gist was, even though there were some things I'm sure the symbolism of I didn't understand, like why the inn was called the Golden Apostle or why there was a panther. But the story and the plot itself was pretty straightforward, but still done really well.
Man, anybody have an answer? Did anybody figure out why he named those things those things? The Golden Apostle and the Panther. The she had a panther. I think she references the panther and and compares the panther to ill. I have a book that calls him ill. Did the one I post call him ill too,
Yeah, it does.
or shill? A lot of translations say shill, but I like ill better. A shill is a person who assists a con man, pretends to be a victim. What other reactions?
This isn't necessarily like a groundbreaking development, but just in terms of like the number of characters is so much bigger than any of the other plays that we've seen. Um, so it's less like really focusing on all these characters, and it's at least the way I imagine it, creating like a living town that's like visually there through the number of people on stage.
Yes, I always envisioned when I wanted to direct it, that in the end, as they close the doors in the inn to talk to for Shill or for Ill, to also slam the doors in the theater and put big chains on them with fake locks, because you can't lock the doors in a theater, and bring the lighting up to the same level that's on stage to encompass the whole audience, of course, with ushers who were ushers and now have uniforms on, to bring the audience into the scariest part of the action. What other reactions to the play? And Aiden, I think the Golden Apostle has to do with, I think that Durandmont may have been making the apostles were friends of Jesus, and I think he may have been connecting Ill to Jesus, dying for the sins of the entire town. At least that's how the town saw it, secretly. Anybody else have
Yeah, I
reactions?
could see that.
What?
Sorry, I just said I could definitely see that.
I don't know if it goes deeper than that. Certainly any other reactions? Yeah, Alan, you don't have to raise your hand.
No, sorry. I really liked a lot of the because it's a tragic comedy. That's what they call it. And a lot of the comedy in the plays really fun. A lot of the wordplay, like at the very start, they start arguing about how they're going to pay for anything. It's like the millionaires are our only hope, with the exception of God, but God won't pay for them. I thought that was really funny. There's lots of stuff with just physical stuff. One that I saw was when the fifth oh no, not the fifth, what is that? It's the seventh. The seventh husband was thinking about something, and then a bell rings as soon as he gets the idea. There's a lot of small stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always saw it as kind of an absurdist comedy all the way up until the scene in the forest between Claire and Ill just before he goes in to die, where they kind of sort of reminisce in the spot that they had sex so many years ago. Anybody else?
I just enjoyed the larger cast. I don't know. All the ones I know this had already been touched upon, but I thought it was fun to have so many characters in it, in like an absurdist play with like, I don't know.
Yeah, and when you look at the characters that Claire brings with her, they can all be very strange, very silly kind of characters. I always saw it as a very broad not a broad comedy, but a dark comedy until it moves into until the action says it's not anymore. But at the same time, apparently that's not the way it's traditionally done, because I did a scene of this for my graduate directing class, and I kind of got grilled. I kind of raked over the coals is what I meant, not grilled. They didn't ask a lot of questions. But the class itself didn't like it. Most of them didn't say anything, of course, because they hadn't seen the play. But those who are familiar with the play really didn't like the way I interpreted it.
I feel like even in the author's note, he says it's supposed to be funny, right? I was reading it.
Yeah, no, yeah. You're right. But it's not necessarily been done that way. I think sometimes it's been done very seriously. Duranmont's idol, the person he modeled himself after. Anyone want to guess who he modeled himself after? He's a Brechtian. So in his mind, the world of the play is up on stage and he's communicating to an audience. And it's not necessarily, it's not realistic, and it's not supposed to be. So what's the play about? Let's get to the heavier stuff.
It reminded me a lot of Rhinoceros actually, in the idea of like the group of people having to choose between two options, and eventually going towards the like what seems like the morally bad option of like let's just kill this guy.
Okay.
Not exactly the same as Rhinoceros, but I it got me thinking about similar themes of like groupthink and kind of mob mentality. Except that in this one, the choice between killing ill and not involves more of a material gain with the money. Whereas in Rhinoceros, it almost feels like it felt more irrational to become a rhinoceros. Whereas in this, banding against ill, there is a little more reason behind it, even though it's just the material gain.
Yeah, I was going to say rhinoceros. What didn't seem to me to be really a choice. It seemed to be
Yeah.
kind of a quick evolution of groupthink. Whereas this one, he's really giving us this moral choice. Do you think that the townspeople made a good case at the end for killing him in the various scenes where my favorite, I think my favorite symbol in all of theater is the yellow shoes, because it's so subtle. I mean, it's not subtle in that when you realize what it means, but in action, you just have people coming on wearing yellow shoes. And that kind of symbolizes that they're a rhinoceros, or that they're borrowing money, and so they've accepted that they're going to be killing ill.
Yeah, I like the sort of evolution of everyone borrowing money and the town becoming more and more wealthy, I guess, or not wealthy, but further into debt, but they have nicer things.
Right. Keep
It's
going.
also just kind of funny because they're like, oh no, we don't want to kill you, but it's like obvious what's going on in their heads.
Right. And that kind of I think the crisis point of the play is when ill doesn't get on the train because he knows they're going to stop him, and nobody indicates that they're going to. They're just there. That is actually when I think it's the scariest, in terms of our understanding of the intent. So, but what's it about? What is it about? I know it seems like it's really simple, but the simplicity of the main point of the play is extremely complicated in terms of how it's expressed and in terms of how it connects to contemporaneous times or contemporary times. So what do you think the
I
play?
take a guess.
Go ahead.
I would say that, and this is like part of my analysis that I just did of the maids, was that like sort of like power structures between relationships, the dynamics are constructed and thus change very often, and there's really no reason people can't change that. And I'd say for this play, instead of power, it's more about morals and the fact that once money gets involved, people realize that, there really is no objective moral thing forcing them to be good, and they would absolutely turn on a dime if they really had to, so I think it's just the subjectivity of morals was what I got from it.
Okay. Didn't anybody at any point think the people were making a good case that they had really wronged this woman, and that and that as a result, her child had died, her and Ill's child had died because they didn't take care of it. I guess meningitis is not indicate, it doesn't indicate anything about the child Guinevere. But led Claire to prostitution, got her kicked out of the town. Didn't anybody buy that really that is the fair thing to do? Hold Ill responsible for what he did? I'm surprised.
I mean, it seemed to me that yes, like the townspeople had wronged her. It's more a question of whether or not the revenge is justified.
Okay.
But like it, I mean, yeah, it seemed like she. I mean, it did seem unfair what happened to her.
Okay.
I went in reading the post. I'd read the postscript first, and there's this part where it talks about Claire, and it says, and I think this is what made me not necessarily side with the townspeople quite as much. It talks about how she doesn't represent justice or a Marshall Plan. She's just namely the richest woman in the world, and thanks to her position, she gets to act like a Greek tragic heroine acted. And so I feel like I don't know, didn't necessarily agree with the townspeople.
Can anybody
Because
think of any? Go ahead, Tatum.
no, that's it.
Well, I'm just wondering if anybody could think of any contemporary parallels that might address the justice that the town people saw after they realized that they were going to when they decided that they were going to kill Ill. And they did kill him without trial, and that's important.
Would this just be considered a misunderstanding and revenge on their side? Well, not revenge on their side, but like they kind of misunderstood and they didn't get the full concept of when the townspeople were convinced to, I forget the person's name.
Ill?
Ill, yeah. So would this just be a whole misunderstanding on their part, or no?
A misunderstanding of what?
That the person that what? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that I can't get the words out of my mouth. I do
Okay.
apologize. When they killed Ill, and they realized that they didn't give him any a chance to like stand up in court for what he did wrong. You know, like they didn't go to like the authorities or anything like that.
I missed that because they are the authorities. The mayor was there. Everybody was there.
Oh,
It wasn't a real trial, but everyone was there just before they killed them.
oh, I guess I didn't see the part that the police were there or the mayor. My bad.
The mayor spoke. He was the guy who spoke.
Oh, that was him. Okay, my bad.
Yeah. I was thinking of the hearings that Congress had over Chief Justice I Like Beer. What's his name? I can never remember his name. I can only remember I like beer. The fact that he was accused of rape by a woman many, many years ago, while he was in college, and we know that people aren't the same as when they're in college. And the Republicans who wanted him and had to try the case, who had the majority in the Senate, quickly dismissed it all because it was so long ago, and there was no real evidence against her testimony, although there was some other testimony. And we later found out that the FBI, who was supposed to do a quick investigation, actually did nothing to investigate. But it kind of reminded me of that, of finding justification well after the fact. Thank you, Rosemary. Brett Kavanaugh. He'll always be I like beer to me. I just loved when he said that. Not for good reasons. Yeah, for very satirical reasons. But anyway, or anybody else who's excused. And you know, in a lot of ways, there's such a different generational worldview today than there was even 40 years ago. And people are still being held accountable, not for overt actions against people, but for using words that were commonly used when they were young. Does anybody know the comedian Dick Gregory? Probably not. Dick Gregory was a comedian. He was a comedian in the 1950s. One of the first comedians to do purely racial humor for white audiences, a black comedian for white audiences. And he became very, very famous because he joined Martin Luther King's group and spoke at most of the national rallies that King held because he was very funny. His favorite joke was, I went into a diner in the South and three brothers came up to me. You know, the guys, Ku Klux and Klan. They came up to me and stared at me, and I ordered a whole chicken. And as soon as I ordered it, the first one said, boy, whatever you do to that chicken, we're going to do to you. And soon after, the waitress brought the chicken, and the guys surrounded his table again and were staring at him. And he said, I put my knife and my fork down, put my napkin in my shirt, picked the chicken up whole and kissed it. And it's hilarious when he tells it, just because he draws it out. But he named his book The N-Word. That's the name of the book. And he dedicated it to his mother. And he said in the dedication, now, Mom, when anybody calls you this, you can simply tell them that they're advertising my book. And that's why he did it. He was trying to demystify that word. And yet today, you know, if someone said it years ago, like Paula Deen, I guess she was saying it then, but you know, if people had that kind of thing in their background, they were often people have been not, I don't want to use the word canceled because nobody can be canceled. They're still people, but they've lost jobs. They've been harmed by their past words and occasionally deeds. And while I don't necessarily approve of the words or deeds, I'm not sure that taking a person's job away or ruining their career is a fair exchange, because not because it's okay to do, but because it was such a non-taboo thing in their earlier years. And I have a feeling that your generation is going to find the same thing in 20 or 30 years. We'll see. I won't, but you will. And so I think this is reminiscent of what's going on with that too. And it's reminiscent of the excuses people give for punishing people that they really don't like in terms of publicity, in terms of a political stance, or you know, you know, because they represent a side that people don't like. And I find that to be unjust, but at the same time, I generally don't mind it, except when it happens. Like Al Franken, who kind of retired from Congress. Do you guys know the Al Franken case? Senator Franken from Minnesota. Used to be a comedian, wrote for Senator.
Yeah, it was the controversy over that picture when he was overseas. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, he was pretending to fondle a woman's breast, and with the angle of the camera, you really couldn't tell. I don't think he was, but she was asleep. And she became a very conservative DJ, and he became a very he was one of the most liberal progressive senators in Congress. And he through comedy, he was able to do a lot of good. He wrote the book Rush Limbaugh's A Big Fat Liar. And Rush Limbaugh sued him. And he said, it's the name of a book. You can't tell me what I can name my book. And he won. But anyway, he was kind of ousted without any sort of trial. And it was the Democrats who forced him to leave because it was too much of a distraction. And I thought that was a real shame that they didn't wait for some sort of adjudication of this or an ethics committee report or anything like that. And I think that's what this kind of play kind of illuminates. It's not just about Il getting killed so that people could get rich. There's also some sort of thing you can say for the way Claire, I mean, think of all the hate she'd been storing up inside her for so many years. And yes, she was a gazillionaire because she married the richest man in the world when she slept with him because she was a prostitute. And he fell in love with her. But at the same time, they did do wrong to her. So there's this juxtaposition of power now that occurred off stage, and Il has to suffer for it. Reactions to that kind of that's really a 10,000-foot view of the play, I realize. But are there any reactions, that kind of take on it? Negative or positive, I don't care.
I think that's a good take, is painting Il as a scapegoat, because like I'm not gonna say he's a good person, but like I think it is disproportionate, and like there should have been a trial for him, and the morality of the town is swayed by like the promise of money and the power that money holds. And I think there's sort of like residual guilt over how the town treated Claire when she was there, and being able to take that guilt and just put it on somebody else and then shoot them. It's no longer your problem anymore. And so I think that's another motivator for why the town kills Il, is because they don't want to feel guilty about how they treated Claire. So they focus that anger on Il instead.
Okay. They also declared that Il was a hero because he allowed them to take their guilt. I think that's why the Golden Apostle is named that. I think that Il is seen as a man who dies for the redemption of all. But it's instead of being a spiritual thing, it's a very materialistic thing. And it complicates everything. You know? The money, I mean, complicates. I thought money complicates everything, because if she had come back a poor beggar, would they have listened to her if she wasn't going to give them money? Yeah. So Dernmont has really created a very, very complex structure for this play, in which there are clear morality problems, but they belong to everybody in a lot of ways. And of course, the people who were directly involved, the chief justice of the town, the two people who were witnesses against her, she's already taken care of those people. Zobi and Gobi, can't remember their names. Oh, Toby and Roby, the gum chewers, and Kobe and Lobi. And those are the people that were part of the town that she had somehow lured out to her and punished physically. And I guess the butler is the ex-chief justice. I don't remember which character played that offhand. So this, I mean, this was a lifelong revenge plot for her. Yeah, Alan.
Oh, just to go on with that, with the sort of like the scapegoating, demonization of ill. It's interesting because him and all the townspeople were they screwed over Claire, but now that Claire's in power, they focus on all the fucked up things that happened to her, but she also did some fucked up things to get to where she is now because she's now like buying people out as butlers and stuff.
Right.
So it's like yeah, I think it just helps with that goes into this sort of corruption of power, just like how money talks. Like they wouldn't have actually listened to her if she wasn't wielding all this power. And then it's like what you were saying before with Jesus, yeah, escape. Sorry about that. But it was just something interesting that there's like a different dynamic where now Ill's in a poor situation in life and she's in a higher one. And she's also done some fucked up things, but she's still like, yeah.
Well, it's a matter of perspective in a lot of ways. Can you think of any other contemporaneous comparison? What did this remind you of present day in any other way? And that for me is the important thing that I see you, Alan. The important thing is that you can relate to this play as a person living today, influenced by what lots of people today were influenced by. Go ahead, Alan.
It's a bit of a broader one, but just with the idea of like scapegoating of like I guess the people in power sort of picking one person or one concept to be the big problem in our society. There's like lots of yeah, what is it? I don't know. One thing that I've been hearing about is with climate change, a lot of people will say it's all the carbon emissions and stuff, but there's other little factors that also play into it that no one talks about. But the biggest thing that everyone likes to highlight is just the carbon emissions or stuff like that. It's just how like people in power will sway public ideology to the public to demonize certain people in society or certain things when there's other more pressing matters or other things that are making things worse.
Okay. I got that, but I don't think anybody ignores ecology as an issue in global warming. The cutting down of huge swaths of rainforest, which gives the world oxygen. And it was really the first I heard of the rainforest being cut down in a major way was, I think, in the 80s. People began, maybe in the 90s. No, the 80s, people began boycotting McDonald's because they were using cleared land to raise cattle for their food. Prior to that, they didn't use much beef in their hamburgers, and everybody was pretty happy with it. And then if you wanted to call something a hamburger, it had to be 100% beef. That was also a controversy. And now we're looking for things to substitute for beef. So, you know. Anyway, yeah, no, I agree with that, Alan, that complex problems are reduced to simplistic problems, often by people in power. I keep going back to the Koch brothers, who completely changed the Republican Party, beginning with Reagan's campaign. And the party became something totally different. Instead of being a party that was for a lot of things, they became an anti-tax party, and not paying taxes became the fundamental goal of the Republican Party before they dropped that. And now they don't want anything but power. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the stereotype. Well, I do know if it's true or not, but I don't want to say it in front of impressionable young people who have no opinion right now, and I might push them toward one or another. Just kidding, Val. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that even back then this play raised for me. Do you have any other climate change is a good one? Any other contemporaneous examples of where this kind of moneyed politics or this kind of blackmail or bribery, whichever one you call it, that is not said aloud, but everybody knows it. Or other things that come about simply because people are willing to give money for it.
Something that comes to mind is like war and like war politics.
Yep.
Because you know, as absolutely horrible as it is, and all forms of wars that could discredit it as a practice, wars is incredibly profitable for people that can profit from it. And there's all kinds of like moral arguments in the favor of war that are just, you know, kind of just there to appeal to confirmation bias to those that already agree with what we're doing, like overseas and whatnot.
Okay. Can you be specific about the war you're talking about?
I mean, all war in general to a certain degree, but if we were talking about more like contemporary times, like for example, like our involvement in like Iraq, Iran, and whatnot, obviously there was profit incentive involved as well. Let me think of some other ones.
Well, you can also look. You can also
Types of
look.
moral posturing going on in fucking Israel and Palestine, us trying to justify a completely oppressive state, massacring civilians from a group that they've been oppressing for, you know, decades. And we think of all kinds of reasons to justify that in our minds because you know that someone here in our Oval Office is profiting from that shit.
Maybe not the Oval Office. I mean, it might be the Oval Office, but I doubt it. But there are people.
Figure of speech. My apologies.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly Israel has changed their. But did you hear what happened over the weekend? There was
Enlighten us.
What? There was a
Enlighten us.
huge protest in Washington, D.C. Over the Palestinian supporting the Palestinian side by American Jews who wore T-shirts that said "Not in our name." In other words, don't have this war in our name because the Palestinians are anti-Semitic. And it bothered me too a lot that people were comparing the attack on Israel with the Holocaust, because that's simply historically not true. Because in the Holocaust, Jews were part of other countries, and they were singled out by the leaders of some of those countries or the usurpers of those countries, usually Germany, and killed. They were the underdogs. They were the people who had no power. And now Israel has all the power, including who can live in the Gaza Strip and who can leave and who can, you know.
Yeah.
So it's and so there's no comparison there, and yet people are making that comparison in order to advocate for Israel. But this weekend, American Jews, it's already happened in Israel too. They blame Netanyahu for the war. They don't blame Hamas. They blame Hamas for killing their fellow citizens, but they blame Netanyahu for the overall conflict because of the way he's treated his government has treated Palestinians. They basically ignored Palestinians, said, take your own state, you go govern. And the Palestinians, I think 20 years ago, elected Hamas, the political party Hamas, to lead them. And then there were no other elections. But the point being that Jews are not the underdogs. Jews are not being singled out because they're Jews. They're being singled out because they're oppressors. And I felt really lonely for the last few weeks, because either Palestinian allies or Israeli allies, anytime I posted anything that said there's no heroes in this war, they're all victims, I would get I would get comments from others. And I would simply respond, I would respond that regardless of what their idea was of who is at fault, there's blame on both sides. And if there's blame on both sides, how can you support one side over the other? Except for making sure that humanitarian goods get to the Palestinians, because they are the most immediate danger of being killed, and they're being bombed on a daily basis. So I don't know. That's just my opinion. But I think I already talked about that from the last play.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, not at all. There is an element of this play that I'd like to talk about if we're okay with a quick subject shift. Back onto the play itself. There's in like the stage directions and whatnot, there's a lot more like physical comedy in this compared to the other shows that we've read through so far. I was gone during the beginning of this class session, so I apologize if this was already brought up. But like, for example, at the very beginning, when Claire pulls through on that train, shows up early, hits the emergency brake, and then like all of her cronies like pull out like an entire train of luggage and just follow her around. Like that has like a physical comedy element to it that was like more so lacking in, say, Waiting for Godot. Closest thing in that would be Lucky on like, being a slave essentially. But even then, that's a huge stretch.
That's not true. I agree with you in spirit, but there are lots of funny moments that are not articulated in the script, except through stage directions similar to this. And it's also incidentally Beckett called it a tragicomedy. Go ahead, Isaac.
Of course. Perhaps what I meant to say is that the physical comedy elements, say, in Waiting for Godot, one that comes to mind is the constant taking off and checking of the boot, or the constant taking off and checking of the hat. Is that comedic? Yeah, but not in the same way that a completely absurd amount of servants holding an absurd amount of briefcases following one person around being carried around on essentially a throne carried by two New York thugs is a different type of comedy. It's more in your face.
Got it.
That's what I was trying to point out. And then I also quite like how, one thing to mention at the beginning, the mayor has like this giant idea of all like the welcoming party stuff that they're going to bring out for Claire when she arrives. But when she hits the emergency brake on the early train, she's just so comically obsessed with the appearance of the town when she arrives that I think I had a point coming into that, but I was taken a little off guard. So
That
my
is
apologies.
comedy.
It's just a funny show. It's funnier compared to the rest of the ones that we've read so far.
Absolutely.
In its own special way.
What? Oh, I just said I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely. I think it's hilarious. Are you there, Isaac?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I agree with you completely. This is definitely a comedy that moves into something that's very, very tragic, but we're never sure why. We're never positive why it's so tragic. Another contemporaneous attitude that I noticed in this is I had some Republican friends back when I was I guess it was after college, but back when I was younger, and their argument against homelessness and poverty in America was that the bottom 10% of people are always going to be in poverty, and there's nothing you can do about it, which is a specious argument, and I'm not sure where that, I think he based it on logic, which is but there's different kinds of poverty now. There's poverty that you die in the streets freezing, and there's poverty where your home isn't as good as other people's. And if we have the money to give everybody homes and the place to go when they're not doing anything else, we would be alleviating a lot of poverty because people would have more time to look for jobs if they didn't have to just look for survival, which isn't completely true because looking for food can also be a full-time job. But that attitude kind of popped up to me in this book. And he was a fiscal Republican. He didn't care about the social issues. I mean, that wasn't part of his politics. So we didn't have arguments about the kinds of things that people have arguments about today. There wasn't really a issue about abortion. And it was legal at the time. It was after 1973. But there's always been this idea by the elite, that the fiscally elite, the rich people, that a certain amount of death through poverty is okay. Just like a general might say a certain amount of risk of lives is okay. You know, if I'm risking 5% of my troops and we can win this battle and gain this land, that's worth it. And I'm not versed in that, how that works. But that's kind of that was the charges that Patton always had. George Patton, the general in World War II, always had, is that, yeah, he was a great general and gained a lot of land, but there were many more casualties in his troops than other generals who were who were more cautious. How does this play? Does this play speak at all to feminism? In its current incarnation?
I mean, I didn't really catch that. I was more thinking of like wealth and the power dynamic that comes with that rather than the feminist aspect, like going into it. And I was thinking about a lot about how, like, if any of the situation was different, how like the townspeople would react so differently. Like if money wasn't involved, or if Il didn't do anything wrong to begin with, and Claire just wanted him to die for like
The fun of it.
Like would they still kill Il? And I do think they probably would if he hadn't done any wrong, because they are so desperate for money in it. I don't know, that's just like a what if, but I also like enjoyed I don't know about enjoyed, but like I thought it was really interesting how confident she was coming in that he was gonna die. Like she comes with the coffin.
Right.
No, I don't know. Like it did seem like an unstoppable force from the beginning. Which
He said, I'll wait. I have time. I'll just wait till you guys do it. The beginning of the play.
On the subject of Tatum's comment there. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Let's see here. There's this point in, I believe it's either end of Act 2 or beginning of Act 3, where Claire and Il are sitting together in like that woodland area after their car ride with Il's family, and they're talking about Il's eternal resting place and how she describes it in great detail. I'm looking for it through the script right
It's in
now.
Act 3.
Act 3, yes.
Pretty
Here we go.
close
I
to
see
the
it.
end.
Yeah. How she describes like the deep blue, a grandiose panorama. You will remain there, a dead man beside a stone idol. Just the way that she just describes the poetic thought in just the idea of having him being reduced to an object for her to have in the form of like a tomb, and just the amount of like contrasting care that she was putting into the preparations for his eternal rest. I found that element interesting, that she was willing to go such the extra mile to ensure that his remains will be given such like plush care, considering the fact that she's also having him getting straight up murdered by his family and friends. And And just that scene in general is probably my favorite in the entire play because it has this I'm struggling to find the words for it, but it has this element of reconciliation with like death itself, like how Tatum said that Claire's just like this completely unstoppable force in this play, and she's confident and she's right about essentially everything. Um, and she's just more so just like a force of nature that has to be like accepted. And that point in the woods when they're talking on that bench really just represents ill really coming to terms with the fact that like, hey, my time's almost up. And there's this contrasting tranquilness in that scene compared to like the hustle and bustle of his everyday life, which is slowly turning more and more, like absurd and macabre as he's watching all of his, people that he's grown up with, people that he's raised, maybe, just act as if he's already dead. Being able to talk with effectively death itself in a tranquil setting about like what his future is going to look like after he's gone. It's a very nice contrast. I like it.
Yeah. What does that dialogue tell you guys about Claire? I think it's one of the most it's one of the only insights into her personality that we get. I have to let my dog out because she's pounding on the door. Keep talking. I can hear you. You don't want to come in. Does it tell you anything about Claire herself, this dialogue? Because I like it too, Isaac. It's one of my favorite scenes also. Well, she was kicked out of the town in disgrace for getting pregnant by ill. Or by accusing her of being the husband. I don't remember what she said at the beginning about that. But doesn't it kind of switch her motivation from getting revenge because she was slighted by him? Don't you get the sense that she actually loved him at the time? And maybe in a lot of ways still does. He was her first love. And it kind of sounds to me in that it was really the fact that she was so in love with him and he rejected her so fully, and her life was completely ruined afterwards. That yes, she's angry at him, but she's also made it motivated by the fact that he didn't stand by her. Yeah, Isaac.
Something that I believe speaks to that is within that same scene, she mentions that she's planning on taking his remains to Capri with her, at least for a time, for him to be like placed there. And his removal of his remains from the town which he currently abides in, I believe, is also her kind of insinuating that even though that she wants him dead and she's going to get him killed, it's just a fact of life at that point, has to deal with it. That she still, in some regard, places him above the remainder of the people that live within the town itself. Like, she doesn't place him, at least not in the same way, in like the same level of sin that she associates the rest of the town with for killing one of their own for effectively a second chance. I think that shows to her odd feelings and regards towards him. And it feels like a cruel god almost, like smiting you down to like the lowest level possible and then just being like, but I mean, you're still better than everyone else here. So even though I'm going to have you be murdered, at least your remains will be no longer associated with the people that did the deed. It's like a weird solace there, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a weird, she's a very complex character within even though she's presented like a cartoon character at the beginning. And that's kind of what I see it as. I see it as a Archie comic that slowly turns into a Batman comic becomes really dark. Where at the beginning, it's a weird thing she's asking, but nobody would do that. I find it so remarkably relevant to today's world, in which education that used to be based on it certainly was education, higher education was certainly an elitist thing. Prior to World War II is much more elitist than it is now. And then GIs got the GI Bill. I'm lowering your hand, Isaac. The GIs got the GI Bill, and everybody could afford to go to college that fought in the war, if they wanted to. But it's still an elitist thing, and whatever powers that be they political or academic, still seem to be trying to keep it elitist. Certainly financial aid is not when I went to school in California, it was free. There was no tuition. We had to pay between when I started, it was $300. When I ended, it was $600 a term. And that was for student services. That wasn't even for the university. But all Californians could have an education at any level of education they wanted, basically for free. If you went to a community college, it was for free. And that ended, that began to be replaced at the end of Reagan's first term, when he cut federal money to education. And that was a huge amount of the education monies that supported higher education and secondary education. And now school districts and institutions are being run like businesses. And it makes no sense, because they're not producing, and they're trying to argue that the product is a human being that's more qualified for more different kinds of work. Whereas the liberal arts tradition is to educate the population for all sorts of reasons, not just to make more money. And I really object every time I hear that we have to make money as an educational program, because we don't. We just have to raise taxes. And all of us benefit from each one of your educations. And we need to recognize that by going to school, you're making our country stronger as a whole, and probably less gullible, because you have other sources of information besides one or two sources that your father used or your family used. You went through a period in which you were intensely learning about something. And so the whole movement between the opening of the play and the end of the play, to me, sounds like the last 60 or 70 years of politics. And it went on before that. So in a lot of ways, I find it to be a very scary play. But on the other hand, I also see its directness, its kind of openness about what these people are trying to hide. I just find very funny, because we see it all over in American politics, business, even education, everything, because everything now relies on private funding. You can see I've done a lot of thought about this play over the years. I read it back in the 80s, 90s, in the 90s, sorry. And I kind of wonder if it didn't affect me more than I thought it affected me. Just the ideas of the play. I'd love to see it someday. How do you guys react to that? Am I giving too much importance to to the play, possibly.
Um, I think the ability to relate the subject matter of this play to reality that we exist in is never going to be a bad thing. I can see a lot. I mean, this play talks about like power, morality, mob think, um, just a ton of stuff that's like, I think it's always going to be relevant, at least as long as capitalism is around. And seeing how like money sways morality and revenge and guilt shifting applies is always going to be just in aspects of life and reality. Um, I'm gonna take it way back and relate to something Aiden said like at the very, very beginning of class, because he and I had very similar takeaways from the maid. And thinking about power again, um, the power in this play isn't demonstrated to be forceful. It is like a slow willingness to accept her money as power, and her money eventually becomes her control over the actions of this entire town. And seeing how money influences people in the same way power influences people, and that money is power in a lot of cases. I don't have a way to conclude this thought, and I apologize for that, but that's just some musings that I had.
I think it's exactly right. I also think that the Soviet Union, the fall of the Soviet Union, taught us that it's not just money, because in the Soviet Union, everybody had the same salary, and power came through in different things. You know, power came through, and if you were at the top of the list to be able to, if you had the perks that society had, so that you could live in a nice place. You didn't have to pay more for the nice place. They were all the same, but you got the nicer place than somebody else. And somehow that power came from somewhere. And so it was a more direct kind of thing than money. It's weird. It's a weird thing, but money represents power to us. Were you going to say something, Tatum? Okay. I really do think, I mean, how many people in this country voted for Donald Trump in 2016 because he was wealthy? Or in 2020, God, what's it? Bloomberg, the former governor of New York, Richard Bloomberg, was going to jump in the race because they didn't think Biden could beat Trump, and he's a very, very wealthy man. And I remember a bunch of journalists that had been anti-Trump because of his worldview. One of them wrote this column that was very complimentary to Bloomberg, and at the end he said he admitted that Bloomberg had given a very large donation to a charity his wife was president of. In other words, he had simply bought the column. He had bought the publicity. And that's on the Democratic side. And that's Friedman from the New York Times, who's a very progressive columnist. And that really struck me a lot, that we wanted to bring our own Trump in, a blunt billionaire who could buy, who could self-sustain their own campaign. And so, yeah, that's people who can give other people things can buy lots and lots of power with that money. And it's not necessarily a willingness to buy, but they're not going to turn the money down, even if they admit that they were paid to write that column, or the wife was, in a legal way. It's just, it's a bargain. It's transactional. And I just get worried that everything becomes transactional, that you guys can buy a diploma without doing the work. And what good is it then? Except that the diploma means getting a higher paying job, regardless of anything else. And if everybody's, if the standards of education are low for everybody, then it's really on a fair scale. But at the same time, overall, it's going to weaken our whole society. And you guys are kind of just buying this meaningless piece of paper that says that you went to this university, but nobody's teaching. I mean, right now, Harvard is still, you are still going to come out with a lot more information and a lot more perspectives than going to SOU. Going to Harvard makes you more educated than going to SOU because their professors are smarter than our professors. Not necessarily all of them, but in a lot of ways. If you go into debt, but you're right. That was from Aiden in the chat. Except for the fact that Harvard has a lot more money to give scholarships to people, and for a lot of people, it's cheaper to go to Harvard. Once they get accepted and get offered scholarships, it becomes cheaper. I think at Yale Drama School, the first year is subsidized, and then you have to pay for your second and third years. But by that time, the department knows you and knows if they're gonna continue your scholarships. So that's Aiden, you're right, but it's not necessarily. It's kind of like a crapshoot for people who, or you have people who pay. Some people, their families give buildings to Harvard so that their kids can get in. I believe that's how the Trump son-in-law, Jared Kushner, got in. That his father actually had a building built for them. And there's people there's no one can say that Phil Nike hasn't affected University of Oregon. They have these beautiful new buildings, especially for the athletes that he had built. And he gives them enough money that they could give many more. I think it's mostly athletic scholarships because he's a football fan there. He wants them to be. But it's this infusion of money. And soon after he started doing that, University of Oregon wanted to separate from the university system. And now we don't have a real university system anymore. Each campus is self-sustaining. And there's just a committee there's one committee that has sway over all of Oregon education, higher education, or the university system. And they still, there's a little bit of connection, but really financially, we're all on our own now, except what the legislature gives us. And that seems to be getting less and less too. So I did that go too far out of it? No, any big money is I think fair game in this discussion about the visit.
And I feel like a lot of Claire's money, like it's all selfish. And I think maybe that's why also even the townspeople's actions, in my opinion, are motivated. Like it's a lot easier to do a bad thing when you put a selfless reason behind it, like avenging Claire or whatever. But I don't know, throughout the whole show, all of Claire's motives feel selfish. Like when Isaac was talking about how she's taking him, it feels like he's gonna live in a tomb on her property or something. He's just like another thing for her to collect now at this point. Right. It feels like And yeah, and I feel like that just relates to money in general. A lot of the motives are for self-benefit, and rarely like giving just for giving's sake.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I'm not convinced that there is no, I'm not sure there are any actions that aren't selfish in some way. That's a Freudian principle. That it is what, no matter what you do, including giving things away, is for your own benefit, even if it's self-image.
That's true.
It may be. It's
I see that. Like, I agree in a sense with that. Like, even if you're giving and it just makes you feel good, in a sense, that is a could be a selfish act because you're making yourself feel better. But she seems very materialistic almost in her selfishness. Like, she prizes her possessions, and those being possessions being people as well.
right. And I think she's very open about that, which is one of the things that also is hurting our politics, is that people who are open about doing wrong things are kind of being celebrated as being honest. And I don't see it that way at all. Just because you're honest about your dishonesty doesn't make you honest, in my opinion. And I think that's an important factor here. And all of these play on each of the actions and the symbols of this play build on that more and more and more.
I thought the end, like their ending prayer, was really interesting too. The townsfolk. I'm like, you're praying. You're also praying to keep your possessions, protect all of your possessions, and I thought that was. I mean, I know they were started off poor, so it was like important to them, but it just, at least growing up, I grew up Catholic. I'm not anymore, but like, I feel like that was something that was really important, is like possessions don't matter or whatever. And so I find that interesting that that's the beginning of their prayer.
Yeah.
And
well, and basically a Christian holiday, but beginning with Catholicism, Christmas has turned into most people don't believe in God. And if they don't, and yet Christmas becomes more and more material. All religious holidays do. Hanukkah is the most material because it wasn't really even celebrated outside of America. Started those celebrations of giving gifts. And when I was a kid, for Hanukkah, we did Christmas and Hanukkah because I come from a mixed family. Excuse me. On Hanukkah, we would just get like one gift might be a wooden back scratcher, basically $1. My parents would spend like $1 for each of our Hanukkah gifts all the way through. Now, people who don't celebrate Christmas, Jewish families that are just Jewish, back when I was growing up, would have the last day of Hanukkah would be like their big gift. It would be more like a Christmas morning celebration if you don't go to church. But that is a holiday that was made more important simply because Jewish American families kind of wanted to compete with Christian American families in a holiday in December that gives you gifts. That's kind of centered around gifts. It was never really a important holiday because it was celebrating the winning of a war, and Jews didn't believe in celebrating the winning of a war then. So, it's this world is kind of moving toward Duramont's greatest fears in his works. And I think we're heading there with our eyes open. Anybody else?
There's a scene that comes to mind that I was a little confused by. It's another scene that I really like, but not one that I feel like I walked away fully understanding it. And that was, it's towards the beginning of Act 2 when Il is going onto the train for Australia. He's like, I'm out, like, fuck this, I'm out of here. And like the whole like town like surrounds him, like on the surface wishing him like, okay, like have a nice trip, whatever, have fun. Um, but he has like a full-on nervous breakdown as he's about to get onto the train, convinced that someone's going to stop him if he tries to get on that train. And I was wondering what the rest of the class thought of that scene, because I wasn't really quite sure what to take from that.
Anybody?
To me, the townspeople feel threatening, like throughout the play, because I don't know. They're not honest, super honest with their motives. Like they are, but they're not. And so I felt it felt like a threat almost that they were all there.
I would agree. It was certainly threatening. One thing that I did notice was that because the schoolmaster, if I remember correctly, he's one of the last characters to outright be on Ill's side, but then also is like the one character that really just admits what's going on within the town in that in the scene in his grocery store. Um, and during that scene when he's having the nervous breakdown before getting onto the train for Australia, he's like very insistently being like, "Get on the damn train, dude!" While the police officer's like, "This man's gone mad." So maybe looking back on it in retrospective, at that point the schoolmaster would have been on Ill's side, not considering even like the notion of killing him. But the police officer, I think, at that time definitely was gold tooth and whatnot, but also when Ill's going to get killed, like at the very end when he's sentenced to death and whatnot, and the mayor's like, go walk down that line, right? And the police officer's like, get up, you, and he like insults him, like very dehumanizing. I think that of all the characters within the town that are more or less so characters as much as they are like archetypes, I think the police officer was definitely onto it from the beginning, and that kind of shows in this scene if you want to read it that way. But beyond that, like beyond just like general town threatening, I just wasn't quite sure what the author was getting at with that scene, with having Ill deliberately having a breakdown at the notion of being stopped and not actually getting stopped.
Other responses from that? About that? You want to go? Go ahead. Leave that open.
The closest thing I could think of is just maybe it's like a sort of inner, like a guilt in his conscience that might be weighing down on him because he might like be worried about, I don't know, like something to do with his guilty conscience weighing on him, maybe, and just the prospect of him getting what he believes is coming to him.
That could definitely make sense. I could also be convinced I'm looking for something that just isn't there, and the scene really isn't that complex. But yeah, no, the notion of it being more of like a internal guilt, like if he leaves, he'll be depriving all these people from a future of some kind. That could definitely play into it.
Anybody want to take a stand on this one? What do you think would have happened if he had tried to get onto the train? Given that the country or the town, does anybody know what Gullen means in German? It's a kind of liquid manure.
Isn't it diarrhea?
Yeah, well, it's a liquid manure. It's sort of diarrhea. Maybe it is diarrhea. And maybe when I read liquid manure, it was just trying to be polite and not get censored. But yeah, it's shit. That's what the town's name is, shit. But I think that's one of the most striking scenes. And I think when everyone knows but doesn't speak about what they're going to do, that's really scary. And there's no doubt in my mind that they would have blocked the doors of the train and not let him get on. They wouldn't have hurt him at that point, but they would not let him get on, the train.
Well, it's totally possible. I think that the scene itself would be more powerful if the notion was that he was allowed to get onto the train. It makes him psyching himself out and having that nervous breakdown more powerful um if he's more so just in his own head at that point. Like the fear of what might happen is causing him to act out and less of an actual threat at that point.
You may be right. It's kind of a coincidence then that the entire town shows up to the train station at the time he's going to get on the train.
Oh, there's absolutely social pressure going on in that scene for sure. That can't be denied.
And they were armed.
When do they start grabbing guns? Is it the beginning of Act 2? Like everyone just has the strap on them.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's beginning of Act 2. Let's see here. Does it say that they are all armed when they pull through? Yeah, the others amble over to his wake. Old suitcases. It doesn't say that they're armed in this scene. However, it is true that leading up to this, there was implications that people were grabbing weapons.
Well, they shoot weapons.
Oh well.
The priest has a rifle too. Okay. And the priest yells, "Flee, flee, we're all weak. Believers and unbelievers, flee. The Gullen bells are tolling for treachery. Flee, lead us not into the temptation of your presence." And then 2 shots are fired and Ilk sinks to the ground. And then Claire says, "Bobby, they're shooting." And that's at the beginning of Act 2.
Right. I think that if in the scene where he's at the train station, if there was like a stage note that specifically said that they were bringing all their weapons with them, then I would absolutely agree that they would have stopped him from getting onto that train. And while the social pressure of that scene cannot be denied, I also believe that well, I don't really feel strongly either way. I do think that Il having the nervous breakdown is just simply more powerful. It's less of an actual threat at that point.
I was in the wrong. So you're talking about the last 2 pages of Act 2. Your train.
Yep, you're right. It's last 2.
Yeah. And they're all wishing him luck. And he says, "Why are you all here?" And they just stay there. He says, "Let me pass." They say, "We're letting you pass." And he's saying, "Someone will stop me." I think someone's going to stop him, but
Okay.
may not. That doesn't matter. The point is that Il doesn't believe he could get on that train.
For sure.
And so I think the ambiguity makes it a little bit more brings a little bit more terror into it. Kind of like when someone in a debate, someone said to Trump, will you publicly say that to white nationalists or to your constituency not to be violent? And he said, "No, who are you talking about?" And they say, "Well, let's say the what do they call Proud Boys?" And he said, "To all the Proud Boys, stand back and stand down," which is not to say don't be violent. It says to don't do it yet, which is how they took it. And so in trying to, it's trying to give one, it's what we call whistle, a dog whistle or coded language. And in this case, it wasn't that coded. And yet defenders of Trump still say that he meant don't be violent. But the rest of us heard something completely different. And so, not to cast aspersions on Trump or his language, but this is a really similar case where he's saying something that he's not, or the town is doing something and claiming not to be doing it at the same time. If that makes sense. It's like Republicans who, not all of them, Republicans who say they fully support Medicare and Social Security, but want to defund it anyway. And that's what their votes look like. But they say something completely different to the public because the public doesn't want to hear that. That's what I think it is, Isaac. I think that kind of double speak was big during World War II. The same thing, and in America, remember that one of the big things that happened while this play was just when it was coming out was the McCarthy hearings. And the McCarthy hearings were the last part of anti-communist hearings in America that not McCarthy, the House Speaker, but Joe McCarthy. That was a huge thing where lots of people got arrested. If they didn't get arrested, their lives were ruined because they were outed as communists or as communist sympathizers simply because they wouldn't turn their friends in for doing something that is not illegal. Being a communist has never been illegal in this country. We've always had an American Communist Party. And yet everyone knew that if McCarthy was looking, he wasn't really looking for specific people. He just wanted to be on the side of, excuse me while I pour coffee. He just wanted to be on the side of anti-communists. And he was nominated for president at the 1959 when Eisenhower had to step down. So it was like 1960s or 1960. It could have been 56. I don't know. And so there's this, and it's been going on. I am sure the Nazis employed that too, saying the exact opposite of what they meant. And their rhetoric was completely different than their actions. I think every time in the early years Hitler took over a country, he would say, "We don't want to go any farther. This was just to protect us in this instance." When they invaded Poland, they took over Austria without a battle, and they annexed Austria. And I think the next one might have been Poland, where they actually fought and Poland lost. And then, so this is a fairly scary kind of play. I love it because it is transparent enough to really, there's no win at the end of this play. There's no positive ending. Of course, he was doomed from the start. And you kind of know that, and you see it moving forward. And the absurdism masks the terror, but at the same time, it makes the unnamed terror even more scary. And I think that's its purpose. Any final words on this play? Well, we're going to talk about it next time and maybe do some historical perspective on it. Okay, has everybody started their final research for their final papers, or at least chosen a general topic and started research on that? You should have done that. I don't want you to answer because that's too embarrassing. Good. You should be starting that now. And enough said, I'm not going to try and document that you did, but please do. All right. I hope you had good weekends, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Eric.
Thank you.
Bye. Take
Have
care.
a good one, Eric.
You too.
Thank you, Eric. Have a good one.
You there, Madeline? Oh, Madeline. There she goes.